Hello all, and welcome to number 15 of Eat NATO for Breakfast. Franziska here from Berlin. It's merely 6 weeks to the NATO summit, which will take place in Madrid, and it's being this big show of unity of all the NATO members. It's like this big security blanket under which all the European countries will find peace and protection against Russian imperialism. And some countries eagerly jump at this invitation, as we have seen in the last week, like Finland or Sweden. Some are a bit more cautious and don't want to give up their neutrality quite so easily. There's discussions in Austria around all this. Among all this posturing, which can perhaps be best summed up as weapons for peace, we want to amplify the diverse voices against war and against NATO. We want to talk about all the detrimental effects, a world order focused on military might and the fear of mutual assured destruction as a way to keep people and the planet itself safe. So from environmental destruction to the incapacity of capitalism to solve any humanitarian problems, from the hypocrisy of the European governments in regards to refugees and the geopolitical agenda of the US, all things related to NATO we want to look at until the Madrid NATO summit. And of course, we hope to inspire at least some awesome poster at any anti-NATO demonstration, which will take place in Madrid on Sunday, June 26. Hello to my dear comrade Nora in Madrid, and hello Neil, joining us from the Galway Alliance Against War, located in the neutral country of Ireland, which as far as we know is not yet planning to join NATO. But then I think in the course of today's show, we will learn a little bit more about how much neutrality on paper is really worth and what that really means. But first, Nora, how are you today? Oh, you're mute, Nora.
I was just saying that I'm always good with friends that want to disband NATO. And that is one of the big slogans that we will be waving in the upcoming NATO summit in Madrid. That is, in fact, like sort of doubly offensive to the peace and justice activists, since it marks the anniversary of Spain joining NATO in 1982. The process, in fact, began before in 1980 and ended with a referendum in 1986, 1 year before I was born. Ironically, that year was named by the UN as the International Year of Peace. So, in fact, in the Year of Peace, the military alliance reaffirmed that Spain will stay as a strategic partner, but with a very close vote, only 52% said yes. The story of this referendum that mobilized the entire Spanish people, that had a clear anti-war and anti-American sentiment, happened in a context of great pressure from the USA. But also, maybe by chance, that same year in 1986, Spain joined the Economic European Community, the current European Union. Maybe the European Union has been never been their own person. So the debates in the public opinion at the time remained in ideological terms, while NATO made this conversation strategic because of the location of Spain as a vital trade and communication route, with many kilometers of coast and importance for the Navy. So maybe all this that I'm saying is similar happening in Ireland, right? So we can talk more about NATO and Spain in the summit in Madrid with a beer maybe, but just to highlight that the agreements on the US military bases of my country are for 1953, done with the fascist dictator Franco. Nothing new. Also, the fascist Portugal or Greece were part of NATO. To all of you who have doubts about NATO defending peace, democracy, and human rights. This is one of the many ways that our countries are linked and were linked to NATO and the US. We hope that Niall can elaborate today on those relations, neutrality, for example, the Peace Association of NATO, and all the ways that NATO has become part of the daily life of all of our countries. So Niall, welcome. I hope you're well. Are you having a cup of tea? Thank you for joining us, Niall. Tell us about how you and the GAAW, or now you tell us how you say your own organization, experience this pressure to conform, and so people switch their opinion. And how do you see similar things happening today in the general discourse? What are, in your opinion, the actual options for peace in the current war? And how do you see it from the Irish perspective, how consent is being manufactured?
A blanket censorship in Ireland since February 24th, since the Russians went into Ukraine. And we have only been given one narrative, and that is NATO's narrative. There's been no attempt to allow anybody else to come off with a different interpretation of what has happened or why it has happened. There's been no mention of all of the various strategists in the US who completely opposed the expansion of NATO. It is a blanket coverage. Even the Pope was censored last week when the Pope in Holy Ireland, it's hard to believe, but it's true. The Pope came out and said that NATO had played a significant part in this whole conflict. It was not broadcast on Irish television or Irish radio, and that's the national stations. They kept that. They mentioned him on the 6 o'clock news that he was going to maybe meet the evil Vladimir Putin, but they did not mention anything that was critical of NATO. And on the 9 o'clock news that night, there was nothing about the Pope. I mean, that is how bad it has been. And really, a lot of people have been concerned that it is going to impact on the whole attitude to Irish neutrality, because that is what the government has been pumping, is that we need protection. And how are we to defend ourselves from the Russian bear invading? And I mean, we also had a commission on the defense forces, which also came out. This was before February 24th, come out saying, how do we defend ourselves? We need to invest. So we were not optimistic. And there were two opinion polls inside the last 2 weeks. And in the first opinion poll, to the great disappointment of the newspaper that produced it, 66% of the population were opposed to Ireland joining any military alliance. The one the next on the weekend, 70%. So it is still there. It's still solid. The views, but there's a lot of sympathy out there for the Ukrainians. In fact, my next door neighbor's got his gardens covered in blue and yellow. Somebody said to me, we play different sports here, one called hurley, and every county has different colors. And another neighbor was saying, those yellow and blue are the colors of Tipperary, County Tipperary. He said, I didn't know your neighbor was from Tipperary. But anyway, nevertheless, the view still is to support Irish neutrality. The question is, how neutral are we actually? And if you want to discuss that, far ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That leads us directly to and please correct me if I'm saying it wrong, the Galway Alliance Against War, the organization that you are a part of. You are working on the west coast of Ireland, and the history of your group is directly linked to actually Shannon Airport. But Shannon Airport is an airport, so what are you people? Are you environmentalists? You know, one could think that, looking at your wonderful background. Shannon Airport also has military operations. And it is these military operations that your organization and other anti-war activists in Ireland have been focused on, because these military activities have, like, as far as I know, always existed, but they have significantly changed in the last 20, 25 years. And they are in contradiction to, or at least for the logical minded, in contradiction to what is actually meant by neutrality. So can you, for people who don't know Shannon Airport or only have been there because they want to fly on some weird holiday, can you give us a little bit of a rundown? What are the military activities that are taking place there? How has the role changed over the years? And exactly what is that contradiction in legal terms or in even moral terms with the actual Irish neutrality?
Well, it's since the war on terror began, or as we call it, the war of terror. Shannon Airport has been used from after 9/11. It basically in 2002 they started using Shannon Airport, the US military, to fly through with military, with soldiers and with weaponry. And that started, and it has gone on, and it still goes on today. And up to now, we estimate something like 3 million armed troops en route to war have transited Shannon Airport. In fact, it is the biggest military army ever to travel through Ireland. And they not only go there, they've been sending to the Middle East, from Afghanistan. They go to Djibouti, where they bring the drones to attack Somalia. They're involved in Syria from there. But so we have had 3 million troops armed. We've also had millions of military hardware going through. In fact, only last week, we discovered that Australia sent howitzers for Ukraine, and they went through Shannon because they flew, I don't know, somehow, but they ended up coming through Shannon Airport en route to Europe. And the other thing is that we were also involved and are linked through the Council of Europe, which is completely separate. The Council of Europe is linked to the European Court of Human Rights, etc. It's nothing to do with the EU, but they did research into extraordinary rendition, and Ireland was shown to be involved, in particular Shannon, of allowing the Guantanamo Express, as we called it, to transit Shannon. In fact, one of the people who was taken from Bagram prison outside Kabul and transferred to Morocco, where he was tortured with knives on his genitals, his CIA captors or kidnappers stayed overnight in Shannon, in fact, en route to kidnap him. So that's the extent of our neutrality. But how is it that we have this? This is going on and nobody says anything about it? Because the media has completely blanked it out. They do not talk about it. And I mean, we marched in over 100,000 of us back in before the days before the war against Iraq. In 2003, there was something like 120,000 people on the main street of O'Connell Street in Dublin. I mean, we used to have massive demonstrations at Shannon. But of course, like throughout Europe and the world, there has been a demise in the peace movement, and with that, the government just sit tight and refuse to change policy, even though, I mean, in actual fact, I've stood in the rain and listened to politicians, and they're saying, when we get into government, we will stop Shannon Airport assisting the US imperialists. And then they get into government and they do sweet FA. They do nothing. And so we reached the stage where we were saying, now we knew that people had gone in and attacked the plane back in the early 2000s and damaged it considerably and actually got off. made no difference. But more and more we thought, we have been doing all this peaceful protest and we're getting absolutely no coverage, and this is continuing. So we decided eventually, in fact, some of our team, unknown to the rest of us, of course, went in and damaged, sabotaged a plane, but didn't want to bear witness in court. But I think, which I think is very sensible, don't get caught. And that stopped one of the airlines ever coming back to Shannon. It caused trouble here, of course, because they came through this door one morning. But after that, we decided to go, we started blocking the runway. We've blocked it a couple of times. It got coverage because one of my colleagues is 80 years of age. We're thinking of developing a youth wing at some stage inside the organization. But in that respect, we've had a bit of coverage, but it's just the frustration that you feel you need to do something, you know. In fact, two American elderly American vets were over and did the same thing 3 years ago, and they just got a massive fine here in Ireland in the courts. Normally, everybody gets off if they have a jury court, but they didn't. And we've got to look at that and ask ourselves, is that something to do with the Ukraine factor?
Yeah.
But that's something to look at. We have another two of our colleagues are up in court, in the same court next month.
Yeah,
but
I read about that case against the American veterans, like they're part of Veterans for Peace. I read about it that just happened in the Irish Times. We can put the link in the comment chat so that people can read up on that particular case.
Yeah,
I have one small follow-up questions before we switch gears a little bit. We've heard it now, like Nora has mentioned it in the case of Madrid and Spain, or in the case of Spain, and you are mentioning it also, that there is this incredible, like the polls still say 60-70%, you know, for peace. Nobody wants to be part of this. You say the media is blocking what is actually happening at Shannon Airport, or what has been happening for the last 30 years. So even if we take the moment of Ukraine out of it just for a second, how do you explain what's the gain? What's the gain for a government, or for example, the government of Ireland, to so blatantly, I mean, after all, we all live in democracies, like, you know, to be so blatantly in contradiction or in opposition to what the people actually want? Like, because I feel sometimes that we have this debate only on ideological grounds, but there has to be a gain. So what's the gain for risking this over and over and over again, of being exposed as a government that does not do the will of the people, or that does do illegal stuff in contradiction to their own laws, regulations, constitutions, whatever? So what's the gain?
Well, there's what's the gain, are you asking?
Yeah, what do they have to gain from being part of this?
Financially, we have nothing to gain. We actually pay for those flights it's part of an international agreement. We cover the costs of all flights that come through. So the only financial gain is that they sell the American soldiers maybe a pint of Guinness or an Irish coffee, but there is absolutely no financial gain, and it is quite clear it is a deeply ideological support by those in the establishment, and that this is the interesting thing. That the Greens who are and the Labour Party, who were the ones getting up and I've listened to in the rain. I mean, there's nothing more frustrating than that. But ideologically, they are linked and are supportive of imperialism. That's quite. And the other ones who are the Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. I mean, Fine Gael's foreign minister, for example, who's been foreign minister for quite a few years now. He's one of the Cork. He comes from the city of Cork, and he's known as one of the Cork princes because there are two families that have got a lot of dosh. But he is linked to the Bilderberg. He's been to Bilderberg, so you see it. And he is pushing he's not only Minister for Foreign Affairs, but he's also a Minister for Defence. But they have absolutely, it's ideological. They crave to support imperialism, really. And it will be interesting when Sinn Féin get elected. What will they do? But I think, if I'm correct, speaking to Nora, wasn't Solana a very anti-NATO at one stage?
Yeah, like that.
And then he ends up the General Secretary of NATO. I mean, these people are opportunists.
Things changed.
No, they're sold out completely. Yeah, but we'll have to wait and see what happens with when Sinn Féin get in. I will be particularly interested because my daughter is the member of Parliament for Sinn Féin here in Galway, so I'd be particularly interested in seeing what happens.
Yeah, but I think that for people that may be hearing us like from other countries, I think it's important to link everything that we are like now unfolding on. If this happens ideologically with the powerful, how come Ireland became neutral or go through that process, right? Mm-hmm. And also why Shannon concretely, right? Like at the beginning, we have the clarity of the strategic point of Spain. We have, we are a bicontinental country. So Ceuta and Melilla is in Africa, as well as the Canary Islands. We have a lot of coast. So why Shannon? And how these, even these imperialist minds are pushing this strategy, Ireland managed to be neutral.
Well, what's interesting about Ireland is we were a colony of Britain. In fact, part of our country is still a colony of Britain. And that is where our neutrality came from. For example, during the Second World War, first of all, it was out of the First World War that we had our revolution for independence. There was a rising in 1916. But back in... So we have got this long history of oppression by the British. So when the Second World War broke out, we were neutral and we stayed neutral. And people can say, but the Nazis and whatever. But as I heard, I don't know who it was I heard saying it or writing it, but from the developing world who said, people get surprised about Europe having fascism. Of Hitler. But for all of us who were colonies, we got treated exactly the way Hitler treated everybody, his invasion all over in Russia and wherever. They slaughtered us. We lost 1 million people back in the 1840s with a famine, which they deliberately had to kill us. And they were exporting food from Ireland, and the people were dying of starvation. So that is why we did not. That is where our it's an anti-colonial position where our neutrality came out of. But those who developed as years went on into the 50s and then the 60s, that establishment have still been since then, since we were joining trying to join the EEC in the 1960s. We're trying to jettison that. Now, why Shannon? Well, it is a good stop off on the way across the Atlantic. That is one reason. But the Americans did offer back in, I think it was 2008, after the direct action which attacked a US warplane and caused a lot of damage, they were offering to remove themselves. And the Irish government said, no, you must stay. because we don't want these people to win. So it's a deeply ideological struggle. Peace is obviously a revolutionary concept.
Yeah,
You know?
and also how you.
I mean, it is a revolutionary concept, really. It's interesting. I was reading. I mean, the EU for me and the European Parliament is the most bogus. I mean, democracy is a questionable concept anyway in the world in respect of any of these countries like the USA or whatever. No matter who you vote for, you normally just get the same. You get the same policies afterwards. But I was noticing there was a good report brought out on the military in involvement, the military involvement in, it's a report I have here, the role of the military and how important it is to develop, rather than a military, but to develop a peace concept where we bring in diplomacy is the thing that we should be working on, not on creating a stronger military. It's an interesting report that was brought out by the left in the European Parliament, and it was brought out by they got two organizations to produce it. One of them was a British one to do with, I've forgotten its name now, but if anybody wants to look at it, it's called Under the Radar, and looking at the environmental aspect of the military. But I mean, they argue what we should be doing instead of creating a bigger military is looking for concentrating our funding on finding solutions to the problems without war.
Yeah, you're right. I think that like it's ideological, and also the grounds of this situation, as you were saying at the beginning, is about security, right? I was just linking it to the Spanish situation because it's the same thing. Like historically, since 1953, those planes, they have the moment of having their fuel change and the change of pilot in Spain. And it's not safe. In fact, in 1966, in Palomares, Almería, 4 thermonuclear weapons fall. And, you know, they were banning the radiation thing from the newspaper. It was a mess. So, in fact, when they are talking about using these places for security, they are... I don't know, they are like not talking about the risks that having this situation in our daily lives, just stopping for the fuels, this B-52, for instance, in 1966, in a rural area, in the coast, in the water, the disaster that happened ecologically, the situation, you know, the negotiations with the US because they didn't want to pay for, you know, removing things, and they were like blocking everything. So in fact, this situation that we are facing with the bases, with the movements in our airports, in fact, is not under the name of security, at least on our security. Mm-hmm. And I think this is also linked to another international relation, that is the European Union and the European institutions. So we now understand that the Irish government has a mandate from the Irish people to be a neutral voice for dialogue and peace. And instead of honoring that, they are justifying massive increases in military expenditure and providing support for, imaginary levels of European militarization. This drift of the European Union also means recruiting small and medium enterprises to become involved with the European Union military-industrial complex. And in fact, the Permanent Structured Cooperation, the PESCO, is one of those parts of the European Union security and defense policy. That is, in fact, the project of being in NATO and also having our own military force. And this situation where Ireland is there in their neutrality includes 25 from the 27 countries of this armed force are part of NATO. And in fact, they are pursuing a structural integration that, I know that you in Ireland, you've been also against everything that happened on the Lisbon Treaty in 2009 when this happened. And in fact, some members of Parliament, of Irish Parliament, they are saying that joining PESCO is an abandonment of neutrality, since 4/5 of PESCO members are members of NATO. And also, in words of Stoltenberg, they are saying how important the agreement on military mobility, in fact, of PESCO and NATO is necessary for their cooperation. So these things are going on in different, linkages. So this is one of the examples to how the policy is defining neutrality and not declaring things, right? So how can we build a real neutrality? And how to make the peoples that have the will for peace to be respected by supranational institutions, because all this sounds very, very difficult to fight against.
Well, in the Parliament itself, in the European Parliament, there's very few agree with your position. There's definitely two or three Irish MEPs who have been outspoken on the issue, Claire Daly and Mick Wallace in particular. But how do we do it? I don't know. I mean, PESCO, this is PESCO. It passed through in December, running up to Christmas, they decided to bring in PESCO in 2017. There was no coverage of it in the media, and it was just brought through. And the Greens who opposed it are now in government and are supporting it. So, we are trying. You're trying to get it out there, trying to explain that why are we wasting, but it's a difficult, I don't know, to be honest with you, how we do it, but it's a struggle. But you've got to be pumping out the information, but how many people take it in?
Yeah, we need to be aware on how, like the European Union own military project is also linked to NATO. So it's not in fact only.
Well, in fact, they say that NATO is an essential. Borrell has said recently that NATO is an essential element of PESCO and the EU. There is a bit of a contradiction, of course, which has changed since February 24th. But really what they want with PESCO as well is to try and they want to develop their own EU army. That's one thing for sure. And they also have their aspirations to go back to the good old days of colonization. I mean, that's why they're all over the place. And Irish troops are involved in Mali. One of the senior people, the most senior military person naval person in Somalia is an Irishman. So they've got their people positioned in Ireland, and we've got this where we had in the army previously a belief in neutrality. In fact, one of our leading figures is a former Irish officer in the peace movement. But now they're developing a new breed who are gung-ho to be along shoulder to shoulder with the mass murderers of the US, French, and German, and whatever, and that is a great problem. And it's one of the difficulties that we have. And it's like confronting anything. You've got to look for novel ways of trying to raise these issues, and it's not easy. Now, we're a small group, so, we try to learn from other people. For example, the whole issue of against war, to do with the environment, we've done blood baths. So you get a bath and you get a load of blood and you pour it over yourself or whatever to make the actual point. But how you get that on a national scale is very, very difficult.
Yeah, but it's important, I think, to raise the situation of that now we're not only facing the situation of NATO, the military expending of the 2% of GDP, but also we have to acknowledge that through our own institutions, there is this PESCO situation that, as you were saying, it wasn't clear. They have some contradictions, like the French position of not having it, of having it. But now we see a reinforcement of these military alliances, and we need to be aware on how this European entanglement also connects us.
Well, it's been but it's changed slightly because of February. But really, their aim has been all along to develop since Lisbon, 2009. And it's, since then, their aim has been, well, even before that, if you actually read the Lisbon Treaty, and I think people should try and get a copy of the readable version of it, which was brought out by Peter Bonda, the Danish MEP. I've got it in my bookshelf there, and I would read it all the time, funnily enough. But all of this is bristling with military clauses, and it's bristling with neoliberal clauses as well. It is the EU constitution, and and the other sinister aspect to it is that Ireland is neutral in inverted commas, but what they're now trying to do is to the European Defence Fund, which is putting in 8 billion into research and development in the military technology, like artificial intelligence and robots and whatever. They are that is being brought to Ireland to get us involved in the military industrial complex, because the PESCO is all part of creating, and Lisbon is all part of creating a unified military force, and that military force needs to have a military industrial complex. And that is in actual fact what is happening. So they're trying to corrupt the minds of workers here to say, oh, if we don't have wars, then we might lose our jobs. Mm-hmm. And that's the way that is one of these sinister development that has taken place. And we're really going to see it. In fact, the Irish state enterprises are involved in trying to bring small and medium companies into the military industrial complex. I mean, that is a serious issue, and one that we've got to confront.
Yeah.
I mean, but that is the EU, this idea that the EU is it was previously a peace plan. It was never a peace plan. When it was brought together back in at the beginning of the 1950s, it was to solidify the French and Germans against the Russians and against the Red threat. That's what it was all to do with. It had nothing to do with peace.
Yeah, no, I think we have all long understood, and obviously understood from the start, that this is not, that generally these alliances are not made for peace and security and for betterment of the planet or the people, but are protecting very specific interests. That's just like, that's capitalist logic 101. And whether we call it neoliberalism or something else, it doesn't change anything about the basic structures of this. We're almost done. Like our time is almost up, and I want to, because at least we try, even our most cynical and most experienced and old guests that we have on the show, we do want to end on a positive note. So Niall, before we end today, I would like for you, because one of the things that I found very interesting reading about the work you have done in the past with the organization and the other activists around Shannon Airport, one of the things that struck me, and you've mentioned it throughout the show, are a number of these activities that you've been doing, like actual direct actions, from having your comrades arrested on the runway of Shannon Airport to bloodbaths to, you were telling us earlier about the air shows and the red balloon thing. So like, like the direct actions that you and your comrades have been engaged in are quite are inspiring. And I'm not going to argue about, whatever effectivity and like, did that change the law or not? I don't want to talk about that, but I do want to ask, is there something you have planned, or is there an action that you and your organizations have done in the past that you're particularly proud of? I want to end the show on a note of let's go to the streets and do something awesome.
Well, I think, around the world, we all suffer from this plight of air shows, which are basically sanitizing mass slaughter. These planes that titillate our children are scurrying and killing the living daylights out of children in the developing world or whatever. We've got to see these planes for what they are. So we had this for years and years here in Galway, and they flew over Galway Bay, and we tried die-ins, we tried leafleting, we did posters. And then somebody said, why don't we, what about that song, The 99 Red Balloons? And of course, I had never heard of it, although I speak German. I'd never heard of it. It's a German song. So, and it's an anti-war song. So we decided that we would get 99 red balloons and we would have them at the protest that was taking place. And I had a rap at my door one day from a member of the police force, to say, we are concerned about those 99 red balloons and we want to discuss with you in our barracks. And I said, I won't go into your barracks, but we are worried that those red balloons could take down a warplane. And we were laughing about this. I mean, it was a joke. But eventually they were so concerned about our 99 red balloons that they came along and burst 97 of them with a pin. The Gardaí came while we were getting ready and burst them all, except for 2. And as I said at the time, if Saddam Hussein had known that red balloons can take down a warplane, he would have won that, and he would have defeated that invasion. But it was a real changing point in the whole affair, because it ridiculed those who were trying to stop us. It got a lot of publicity, and in the end, what actually caused the defeat was an accident when a door from a helicopter fell off and hit some of the spectators, who, in my opinion, actually deserved to be hit for being at something like that. But in fact, somebody came up to me and said, I was nearly hit by that. And I said, well, a pity you weren't. Anyway, but we have been blamed. For as somebody said to me, you're one of the most hated people in Galway for ending the air show. But we called it a war show. But really, it made it gave it impetus, and it got a lot of support among people. Thought, well, that's a good idea. So for us, 99 red balloons, and we suggested to different. There's now one over in the east coast of Ireland. And we keep sending them, get your 99 red balloons out. Although I think I would be sending a drone up. No, I'd be a bit more sophisticated.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you. That's a really good story. And air shows are a thing in lots and lots and lots of places. And that is something that is worth starting out in terms of protest, getting those air shows away from, people.
Next time, you need to go with backup balloons, You cannot go only with the 99. You have to go with backup balloons.
Okay. I don't know what butter balloons are.
I want to thank you. I want to thank you, Neil, for joining us. I know it was early for you. Thank you. Anyways, I want to thank everyone who listened in and who joined us. And I want to quickly just say that next week we'll be talking with a group a group of veterans for peace that are living and working out of Italy at the moment, and we'll be talking specifically about the studies they have done, because apparently they also just won a court case in regards to the depleted uranium shelling that has been used in some of these horrible conflicts. So we will be talking more specifically about the health aspect. I mean, it sounds silly when I say health aspects of war. I mean, that just is cringe in and of itself.
That was one of the that was one of the main big pillars.
That's not talked about so much. So we'll be talking with them next week, and I would invite all of you to join us again next week with comrades from Italy. Thanks again, Neil. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day, and we'll speak soon. And maybe we'll see you.
Going back to bed now.
Oh, wonderful. Please.
Arrivederci. Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you.